So during the colonial period, or before the colonization, there was no country called Nigeria, and it was amalgamated as a result of the British influence. So what they did was they created a federal structure, which means they devolved power towards periphery for certain extent, and also they made sure they give more support to the minority. Now, during the Biafran War, the southern western federal state wanted to separate from the north. So, even in the conflict period, there were 3 federal states. But after the conflict, meaning that actually the end of the conflict was a total annihilation of the Biafran movement. This is another similarity to the Sri Lankan context. A civil war that was completely won by the government armed forces. So the Biafran movement was utterly defeated. But as a resolution, they continuously persisted on a track of political accommodation, meaning that dividing more power towards periphery. So during the colonial period, even after the colonial decolonization, there were 3 federal states. And after the conflict, the military regime of General Gowan, he was a very accommodative general. He was the head of the state. And he divided Nigeria into 12 sub-federal regions. But what the irony is, it further aggravated the ethnic cleavages in Nigeria. So in 1967, we saw 12 federal states. Now there are 36 federal states in Nigeria. So the devolution of power didn't end. Right. So it is not only the linguistic or religious, but also self-definition creates new politicized identities. New structures support new identity formation. Now, this is the point. Now, during the during the Biafran movement, there was a group called Ikwiri, ethnic group. They found themselves similar to another ethnic, the ethnic group called Igbo ethnic group. Igbo. So they are the ones who really supported this Biafran movement. But once the federal structure was supported by the General Gowan's regime, later they found themselves as separated from the Igbo group, which means that when power was devolved more towards the periphery or peripheral areas, then new minorities and majorities were created in those sub-federal regions. So again, there were minor conflicts for resources in sub-federal states. So those who identified synonymous to the previous groups, then they again felt that they are not really identical to that their previous group because of the resource inequality. So in Nigeria, the power and resources played a major role, because when you devolve more power towards periphery, it created more states and it recreated more identities, more majorities and more minorities. So there were obvious conflicts for resources, especially oil. So the federal structure in Nigeria was both a cause and a consequence as well. Because now after the Biafran War in Nigeria, they took the federal or devolving power towards periphery as an alternative, and it also supported creating more and more ethnic divisions and cleavages. So we need to question whether, even in rhetoric we say devolution of power is very good, or it should be the best alternative for the Sri Lankan context. Now we have to rethink again whether it could really deliver the expected results. Right. So let me just a little bit move fast. So it is true that political accommodation or dividing more power towards periphery prevented another civil war in Nigeria. It really prevented. But it did not prevent the further fragmentation of ethnic identities and ethnic cleavages. So it actually produced a deeply divided society in Nigeria. So what are the lessons that we could learn for Sri Lanka as well? Now, we can actually persist on 3 political projects. Either we could accommodate the minorities, or we could assimilate them, or we could have an hegemony over them. So when you go through the lessons of Nigeria, you obviously feel, well, accommodation might lead to further polarization, because there is a danger that accommodation could create more and more ethnic cleavages. So another option is equal assimilation. You assimilate all the citizens, irrespective of their ethnicity, to the state. But the problem is, some people say we are actually too late for that. So what is the ideological answer to this political deadlock for Sri Lanka? Either to proceed on a track of assimilation, or to proceed on a track of accommodation, or to proceed on a track of hegemony. Now, if you want to assimilate, there is an obvious problem. Because if you say that we are going to absorb everyone irrespective of their ethnicity or religion, will the Sinhala Buddhist hegemony, or say the dominant nationalism, allow you to do this? That's the obvious question. So producing that question to you all to discuss, I will end up my presentation, and thank you very much for tolerating me.